Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Herridge reporting from Washington. Thanks for streaming. Here's a look at the top stories we're tracking right now. Violent assault. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband attacked inside their San Francisco home. The suspect facing several felony charges, including attempted murder. Twitter takeover. Elon Musk takes control of the social media platform. What's next for its millions of active users? Rallying Georgia voters. Former President Barack Obama campaigns for Democrats Stacey Abrams and Raphael Warnock. Our Nicole Killian is on the trail. Plus,
you know, I never want to lose a great soldier and family because they can't get child care or because they're not happy with their housing.
we have an update to a CBS News investigation into the military child care crisis that found Special Forces soldiers quitting the service, how the Army Secretary is responding. And Tom Brady and Giselle Bundchen divorce after 13 years of marriage. But first, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul, has undergone successful skull surgery after being violently assaulted Friday morning at their San Francisco home. Speaker Pelosi's spokesperson confirmed she was not there at the time. A source tells CBS News once inside, the suspect repeatedly shouted, "Where is Nancy?" He also reportedly planned to tie up Paul Pelosi while waiting for the House Speaker. Police confirm Paul Pelosi, who is 82 years old, was assaulted by the intruder with a hammer. San Francisco police held a press conference Friday afternoon where they discussed how they encountered the suspect at the scene when they arrived.
The suspect pulled the hammer away from Ms. Pelosi and violently assaulted him with it. Our officers immediately tackled the suspect, disarmed him, took him into custody, requested emergency backup, and rendered medical aid. The suspect has been identified as 42-year-old David DePepe. Mr. Pelosi and Mr. DePepe were transported to a local hospital for treatment. This is an active investigation.
And the White House released a statement saying, quote, "The president is praying for Paul Pelosi and for Speaker Pelosi's whole family." He called Speaker Pelosi to express his support after this horrible attack. For more, let's bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland. Scott, what's the latest information about House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul?
In a statement from her office, a spokesman says Paul Pelosi has undergone successful surgery for a skull fracture and injuries to his right hand and right arm. He's expected to make a full recovery. Our CBS News reporting is that the attacker in this case struck Pelosi multiple times in the head with a hammer after a struggle for that hammer. But what's more, Catherine, this resonates with echoes of January 6th. According to the sources speaking with CBS News, the attacker in that room said, "Where's Nancy? Where's Nancy?" in that house as he was pursuing Nancy Pelosi. Those words coming 660 days after the attack here at the U.S. Capitol, where any number of rioters were yelling, "Where's Nancy? Where's Nancy?"
Well, we don't know the motive for the attacker at this point. So walk us through how Speaker Pelosi learned of the attack and where she was at the time.
Yeah, unequivocally, the San Francisco Police Department says a motive has yet to be determined. It is important to underscore that. We know Speaker Pelosi wasn't home. She was to be speaking tomorrow night at a major event here in Washington, D.C. That speech, those remarks have been canceled. She's returned home to be with her husband. But if Nancy Pelosi were at home, if she were there, presumably her Capitol Police detail, her dignitary protection unit would be with her. They surround her pretty much at all times here at the U.S. Capitol, and they travel with her 24/7. She wasn't home, so law enforcement wasn't present outside the house at the time of the attack. That's what witnesses say. They say it was surprising to hear of this because they usually see police cruisers, a police presence outside. But with the speaker out of town, the Capitol Police detail wasn't there.
Given what happened to Paul Pelosi Friday, is the security posture being adjusted for congressional leadership?
In the immediate future, yes. Our CBS News reporting is that Capitol Police, at least in the short term, in the wake of this assault, considering putting protection with spouses of leadership, with spouses of the dignitaries they protect. Think about the majority leader, minority leader, the whips, those who have need for a special detail because of threats. But there's a longer-term question here, Catherine. The Capitol Police have a finite number of officers. They have a finite amount of resources, and they have only so many places they can be at one time. Truly, the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate cover all 50 states. Every square inch of America is covered by a member of Congress who may at some point need protection. So they've got to measure and balance those 2,000 or so employees that they have, but also where they are at any given time. Any number of them have to be here protecting the Capitol complex. There are others spread across the country. They'll have to balance who goes where and when.
Scott McFarland, thank you. CBS News has obtained an internal intelligence bulletin shared with federal law enforcement as well as state and local governments ahead of Election Day. It warns of a heightened threat environment. The intelligence is all the more concerning given the attack on Speaker Pelosi's husband. CBS News Chief National Affairs and Justice Correspondent Jeff Bougues joins us now. Jeff, this bulletin talks about the possible targeting of two distinct groups, election workers and public political figures. Break it down for us.
Yeah, it is, Catherine, a fairly lengthy document in terms of these bulletins that, as you know, we see periodically. And what these are about is getting the information from federal law enforcement to local and state law enforcement. And then in this case, what we have is federal officials concerned about really the next 14, 20 days, maybe longer than that, that these domestic violent extremists, DVE violence, includes, potentially targeting candidates running for public office, elected officials, election workers, political rallies, political party representatives. And what they're saying in that statement is over the next several days, you will have these candidates out and about. This is the final stretch of campaigning. And so what law enforcement is warning here is that they are potential targets based on the amount of threats that law enforcement is seeing out there. So the other aspect of this is something that we've seen really since 2020, and this increase in threats against election workers. Any sort of election worker that has been connected or is involved in any kind of counting of disputed votes. There are 7 states that had disputed elections in 2020. And so the concern is if after these midterms there continue to be conflicts over the vote, then you could have election workers again targeted in the wake of the midterms. So while there aren't a lot of specifics in this document, Catherine, it does give local and state law enforcement things to look for and things to be prepared for should something happen where they live.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, do you also agree that in this intelligence bulletin, there's a unique emphasis on lone offender or lone wolf attacks?
Yeah, and as you know, those are the kinds of attacks that are perhaps most problematic for law enforcement. Why? Because it's one person. It's one person typically not operating in a group. And what I mean by that is that they're hard to stop. They're hard to spot. Oftentimes you'll have federal law enforcement saying that, hey, if you see something, say something. Because when you have these individual actors planning for violence, sometimes it's hard for law enforcement to spot. Now, they do, in a lot of cases, they pay attention to what's happening on social media. But there is, of course, such a thing as free speech. So there's very little they can do unless they see someone online threatening some sort of violence and then taking steps to reach that goal. So there are several things, as you know, that law enforcement is concerned about leading up to and after these upcoming midterm elections.
Jeff Bougues, thank you. Elon Musk has taken control of Twitter in a $44 billion acquisition. There's already been a management shakeup within the company. After the deal closed, Musk fired 3 of Twitter's top executives. The takeover has left users, advertisers, and employees in the dark about Elon Musk's intentions. The deal means Twitter is now a private company, and everyday investors will no longer be able to buy shares. The New York Stock Exchange suspended trading in the company stock Friday. Those shares will be delisted on November 8th. Kaylee Hayes joins us. She's a senior tech reporter with Business Insider. Kaylee has been following the Twitter story from the very beginning. With the firing of these top executives, is this just the beginning of the Twitter shakeup?
I would say so, yes, Catherine. He has definitely been gunning for the executives specifically for some time. They were not getting along pretty much all throughout this deal process. But there are almost certainly going to be layoffs of, rank and file staff. He's going to go about reorganizing the company probably in relatively short order.
So that's on the management side. Let's talk about the policy side. Do we have any insight into what his policy is going to be on banned users?
I'm not sure. He said publicly before that he doesn't really believe in permanent bans, lifetime bans, et cetera. So there's a handful of people in there, including former President Trump. He, though, lately has seemed to be attempting to walk back a little bit some of the things that he said publicly about content moderation and, free speech, et cetera. He said just yesterday, in a note definitely targeted towards advertisers that he did not want the platform to be a free-for-all hellscape. So he knows that Twitter is a business. He knows that that business is based on advertising. He knows that advertisers like to feel brand safety or at least have some element of that on a given platform. So it remains to be seen exactly what his policy will be, but probably some people will be coming back.
Yeah, he put out a tweet late today saying that those found or barred with minor or dubious offenses would be freed from what he called Twitter jail. So just to take that a step further, within hours of acquiring Twitter, there's been a reported explosion in hate speech on the platform. So how does he respond?
I think he probably doesn't respond. Honestly, okay. Musk seems to be one of the executives that lets things play out sometimes. He responds to things sometimes, and a lot of the times he doesn't, or he'll turn it into a joke and it kind of diffuses itself from there. But he hasn't changed Twitter at all. Twitter is literally the same as it was yesterday, today. So this is the way the platform operates. People can push the boundaries, and if they're caught by the AI that mostly does the content moderation, then they're caught. But a lot of the content that is problematic is not caught by the AI as Twitter exists right now. So this is not really Musk's Twitter, it's Twitter.
Okay. How quickly will Elon Musk move to a fee-based or ad-based service?
I think he's probably going to do it in two parts. I think there will probably always be a free Twitter, but Twitter right now has a subscription offering. It's called Twitter Blue. It's just not very popular. So he will likely experiment further with that and try and get it to be more enticing to people to pay for it, have more products, have more features that people would need to pay for to receive. But I think there would always be a free part. But Musk is somebody who says things, makes pronouncements, demands things that his employees then have to kind of scramble to create. So there will probably be a lot of experimentation.
Let's talk about the timing. This acquisition is happening in the final days of the campaigns. What do you think the impact is?
I'm not sure. I mean, there has definitely already been, from my just basic user experience anyways, an increase in misinformation, people being unable to tell what is true and what is not. But again, that isn't really Musk's Twitter. I think that is just part and parcel to the political climate that we're in. It will probably be an issue. I mean, it could be a huge impact if, let's say, Donald Trump comes back to the platform right before the midterms. But again, I mean, Twitter was never a utopia before. It's been a messy place, a chaotic place, a place where people get excited and say a lot of things. So it will have probably the same effect that it would normally have had.
I just want to pick up on something you said there, because you've been covering this really from the very beginning. So you feel pretty confident that former President Trump will get back on the platform before the midterms?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's like 50-50, like anything. It definitely could happen. There are persistent rumors that it will happen, but Musk has said literally nothing. He said nothing to staff. He said nothing publicly outside of what he's tweeted. So I'm not sure that it would happen. I think it would be a big issue for advertisers if that did happen. I think that would send a signal to them that Musk was going to do some things that they did not like. And I think Musk has realized over the past several months that in order to run this business, you kind of have to deal with advertisers in a way that they want to be dealt with.
Kelly Hayes, thank you.
Thank you.
With just 11 days until Election Day, former President Barack Obama is on the campaign trail in key battleground states. He traveled to Georgia Friday to rally for Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock and gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams. Early voting in that state began last Monday. According to Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, more than 1,250,000 people have already cast their ballots, and the number of people who voted on the first day of early voting was nearly double the amount recorded in 2018. Former President Obama will fly to Michigan and Wisconsin for more campaign events Saturday before heading out west next week to promote Democrats in Nevada. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins us from College Park, Georgia. Nicole, what voters are Democrats hoping to reach with the former president?
Well, I'm sure you can hear the background noise behind me.
I was
and it probably
just going to
sounds
say.
more like a party or a club than a campaign rally, but I promise you it is one. And we are waiting for the former president to take the stage. But, you know, look, what people here are hoping is that the former president will really energize people to get out and vote. Clearly, we have seen record voter turnout in early voting here in Georgia, but many people question if it will be enough because these races, whether you're talking about the Senate race or the gubernatorial race, they're just so close and so tight. So this is really about trying to turn out the base, get out those voters as early voting continues in the state and obviously on until Election Day.
So let's take that a step further. If one of the primary goals here is to get out the vote, are there specific voting groups or demographics they're hoping the former president has a lot of reach with?
Well, certainly African-American voters here in the state make up about a third of the electorate, and I can tell you that this event right now is predominantly African-American in terms of the folks who are in the crowd. And, you know, that is essential for any of these Democratic candidates to be able to win. And, you know, in the case of Georgia, you have to get over 50% to win your race. You know, otherwise you're going to head to a runoff. So, again, it's really about trying to motivate these voters to turn out as they did in 2021, to turn out as they did in 2020. And there's some real questions about that because, as you know, Catherine, Democrats across the country are facing headwinds. The president right now, President Biden, is very unpopular in this state. And so that is one reason why you're seeing the former president here instead. And it's unclear if the president would come down, but many still have high views of the former president. They're excited to hear his message. So again, this is really about driving turnout as much as they can, not only among African-American voters, but young voters, other voters of color, Latino voters, the AAPI community, people in the suburbs, women, independent voters. So this really will be a broad brush, and I'm told the president, former president, is expected to address the crowd perhaps for more than half an hour. So it sounds like he will have a pretty extensive message for the crowd here this evening.
So really, with less than 2 weeks before the election, what are the issues that matter in Georgia?
Well, it continues to be the economy. That is certainly an issue. We have seen Republicans drive home, whether that is the governor, Governor Kemp, as well as Herschel Walker. But abortion rights comes up time and again, particularly when you talk to female voters in the state. So these are the issues that continue to resonate around the country, and Georgia is no different.
Nicole Killian, it sounds like things are about to get happening. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Coming up after the break, is China trying to interfere in the U.S. elections? We'll take a closer look at the tactics they're using on social media. Plus, a condo is evacuated in Florida, not too far from the site of that building collapse last year. We'll show you what inspectors found. You're streaming CBS News. Federal officials are warning that China is working to interfere in November's election. Last month, Meta, the parent company of Facebook, took down what's described as the first targeted Chinese campaign to interfere in the nation's politics. But there are still concerns that Beijing could influence some closely contested races. For more, I want to bring in Rachel Levy. She's the director of geopolitical risk at Active Fence, a technology security company. We hear so much about Russia, but what makes China different in these information operations?
Sure. Hi, Catherine. So China really engages in many different types of malign influence campaigns. They range from decentralized and centralized botnets that consist of thousands of entities and fake accounts that usually don't have a ton of interaction and engagement, all the way to very targeted operations, operations that are run specifically looking to influence a specific target audience that's usually focused more on quality than quantity. We've also seen a lot of campaigns that are engaged in we call active measures, so things that coordinated efforts to brigade, so that's harassing and getting removal, doxing, and hacking campaigns that are targeting dissidents, oppositionists, and related activists and all their activities. And this is really something that's not perceived on the same par as Russia, but China is actually very active in this space, and they're engaged in sophisticated and complex campaigns.
Right. OK, so to break it down simply, is China more interested in targeting specific candidates who may be promoting policies that are against their interests, or are they more interested in undermining our democratic institutions?
Sure. So the content that we've been seeing related to their activities in relation to the U.S. midterms hasn't really been focused on specific candidates or specific elections. They've been more focused on kind of demoralizing the voter and really trying to polarize and sow discord, which is actually something that we saw very much affiliated with Russia in the past. But this is new activity for China. And these are kind of focusing on things like the democratic nature of the elections, suggesting that the United States is on the brink of civil war, that the U.S. is divided and chaotic, divided among racial lines, and that essentially the two-party system is a joke. They're also focusing on a lot of issues that are very important in the midterms, things like inflation and the economy, and really zeroing in on those hot-button topics to basically denigrate the United States and demoralize the voter.
Based on my reporting, there is a split among some current and former intelligence officials about how active China was in the last election cycle, and some are arguing that this time around they feel more emboldened. What are your thoughts?
Sure. So we know, at least from the National Security Council, that there is the assessment that there was, at the very least, voter registration data that was being utilized to try to carry out these malign influence campaigns in the 2020 election. But they've definitely grown more emboldened. I think that's been evident in a lot of the headlines in recent days. Also, we've seen things related to harassment to particular candidates that have specific stances on China. But this is definitely a shift, a paradigm shift in their activity. This is not something we've seen in the past. So it's an indicator that they're taking more interest in this type of activity, and it's a concerning one.
It's less than 2 weeks from the election. What are the red flags that voters ought to be looking for to know when they're seeing an influence operation?
Sure. I think people should always be skeptical and come with a nuanced eye to the information that they're consuming. And I think it's such a broad problem that's plaguing society that we always need to be asking ourselves the question, where did this information originate from? who's sharing it, where and how am I consuming it, and people really need to kind of focus on trusted news sources. There's so much misinformation and so much disinformation that's floating around, and it's by design created to try and blend in and try to be deceptive. So it's really important that people have kind of their trusted sources of information and rely on those for what they read and what they ingest and the information they take in.
Former intelligence officials said to me to always be on the lookout for anything that makes you feel real emotional. They said that's often a telltale sign. Rachel Levy, thank you.
No problem. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
The Russian defense minister says the partial mobilization of 300,000 reservists to fight in Ukraine has been completed. He made the announcement during a meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin that was broadcast on state television Friday. Putin declared a, quote, partial mobilization of reservists last month. The move touched off an exodus of military-aged men from Russia. On Thursday, Putin delivered a bizarre speech in which he blamed the West for the war in Ukraine. He said, quote, the West is playing a dangerous, bloody, and dirty game. Meanwhile, residents in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, and nearby regions are facing power cuts after a new wave of Russian airstrikes damaged the country's power grid and infrastructure. In response, the Ukrainian president vowed Russian attacks on power plants would not scare his people, saying, quote, we are not afraid of the dark. Meantime, residents of a 14-story Miami Beach condo have been forced to evacuate after the building was deemed unsafe. Engineers on Thursday discovered that a crack in the main support beam, which was initially identified 10 months ago, had expanded. The notice required residents to vacate the Port Royal condominium immediately. According to our Miami station, tenants have to find somewhere else to stay for at least 10 days. The building is located about a mile away and on the same avenue as the condo building that collapsed in Surfside in June 2021. 98 people were killed. Still ahead, we'll have more on our top story, the brutal attack on the husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and what's being done to protect both Democratic and Republican congressional leadership in the wake of that assault. You're streaming CBS News. Welcome back to CBS News. I'm Catherine Herridge in Washington. Here's a look at our top stories. Elon Musk has officially taken control of Twitter in a massive $44 billion deal. Some top executives have been fired, and investors can no longer buy shares in the company. Former President Barack Obama went to Georgia Friday to campaign for the state's Democratic and gubernatorial candidates. He also plans to visit Wisconsin, Michigan, and Nevada next to boost support for the Democratic Party ahead of Election Day. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband is expected to make a full recovery after being attacked with a hammer at the couple's home in California. Authorities say the suspect in the case is facing multiple felony charges, including attempted murder and elder abuse. We are learning new details about the attack at House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's home in San Francisco. For the latest, let's bring in CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan. Margaret, the U.S. Capitol Police is charged with protecting the Speaker and other congressional leadership. Does the security posture change?
Well, our reporting here at CBS is yes, it will, and that Capitol Police are conducting a security review, increasing security for top leadership, and we know that federal investigators, according to our Jeff Pegues, are looking at the actions of the attacker himself in the days leading up to what was carried out in the very early morning in San Francisco. But this really gets, Catherine, at something we've been talking about on Face the Nation for some time, which is the risk in this really high-tension moment around the election of the potential risk of political violence. Now, we don't know the exact motives of the attacker, but we know he went in demanding the Speaker of the House. And that we know, according to Speaker Pelosi's office, that the attack was serious, and serious enough that Speaker Pelosi's husband had to undergo surgery to deal with fractures in his face. So we're going to talk about this and the risk right now, more broadly, with one of the top Homeland Security officials.
I was just going to take that a step further. You are hearing from someone who's charged with election security and integrity. You know, based on this high threat environment, what do you think makes 2022 stand out?
Well, Jen Easterly is head of that Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, part of Homeland Security that gives federal support to the states. The states administer your elections, but the federal government provides key support. I want to talk to her about these foreign influence campaigns. We've heard a lot, and you've reported quite a lot on China and Beijing's efforts to establish influence at even the party level. But given what's happening just within the past 24 hours, I also want to talk about this intelligence bulletin Homeland Security put out, warning that domestic violent extremist groups may be looking to target sites where people will go to cast their ballots, and also election workers. We want to talk about all of this to get the bottom line, because people need to be confident they can show up and safely vote and trust the integrity of their vote. That is just foundational to how our democracy works.
And you're also hearing from senior party campaign officials. What are you hoping to find out there?
Yes, we are. And we are in this home stretch of the race. We have Republican Congressman Tom Emmer's of Minnesota, and we have Sean Patrick Maloney, key Democrat from New York. Both of them are sort of the key coaches of their respective parties, trying to help them gain control of the House. And we will have the latest CBS News estimates from Anthony Salvanto, our elections guru, who up to this point has been predicting that Republicans will take the House with 224 seats. We will see if that momentum has built in what will be our final CBS estimate before those ballots are officially cast on November the 8th.
Margaret Brennan, thank you. And as a reminder, you can watch Face the Nation right here on CBS News. It streams at 12 p.m. and 4 p.m. Eastern every Sunday. Arizona's Attorney General has agreed to postpone enforcing a near-total abortion ban until 2023. The 1864 law, which completely bans the procedure unless the mother's life is in jeopardy, had been blocked since Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973. But it was called into question after the Supreme Court's ruling this year. A lower court halted all Arizona abortions in September. An appeals court then blocked enforcement of the ban on October 7th. In a statement, the head of Planned Parenthood Arizona said, "While we are celebrating today, we can't ignore that we are still on a long and uncertain path to restoring the right to abortion in Arizona." At least 42 people were killed Friday after heavy rain triggered flash floods and landslides in the Philippines. The torrential rain comes ahead of Tropical Storm Nalgi. Despite preparations, heavy rainfall exceeded expectations in the southern province. Authorities have evacuated thousands in anticipation of the storm's arrival. We're tracking some storms here in the U.S. this Halloween weekend. Meteorologist Jackie Jarris is with our partners at the Weather Channel and has the forecast.
A stormy weekend ahead for parts of the South. In fact, even a few of the storms could become severe. We'll be watching the lower Mississippi River Valley for the risk of tornadoes, large hail, and damaging winds through your Saturday. But the good news out of all of this is we will be getting some rain that is much needed across parts of the Mississippi River Valley. Now, that same storm system will be affecting the southeast through the day on Sunday. By Monday, it lifts northward and moves up towards the Great Lakes region. It's going to draw in a lot of moisture that's going to get pulled northward. And unfortunately, that's going to bring some rain that will affect you while you're trying to do some of your trick-or-treating as we head into Monday evening. The heaviest of rain would most likely be into the Ohio River Valley, but this will spread into the northeast. This will be spotty light rain. I don't expect anything severe, so you might have to just get a little bit wet here with your costumes. That said, it looks rainiest across parts of the Pacific Northwest with a very active weather pattern. Watch the Weather Channel on cable and now streaming live on your favorite TV streaming device.
Jackie Jarris, thank you. Coming up, I spoke exclusively with the U.S. Army Secretary about a child care crisis in the military and what's being done to help families. You're streaming CBS News. Now an update on a CBS News investigation that revealed more than 11,000 military children under the age of 5 are waiting for government-provided child care. And in some cases, Special Forces soldiers in Florida were juggling up to 3 hours of commuting every day for child care. Driving from their home in Crestview, Florida, past their training base at Campbell Simons, 20 miles away, home to the elite Green Berets, and then to where the Army offered child care spots another 20 miles to the south on Eglin Air Force Base. Speaking exclusively with CBS News, Secretary Christine Warmuth, the first woman to lead the Army, told us a new child care center is planned for the Special Forces base as part of a broader strategy to address the shortages. We're going to start with child care at Campbell Simons in Florida. How did you get involved?
Well, I first heard about the situation there when I was down at U.S. Army Special Operations Command, and I was meeting with a group of women to learn about sort of women in Army Special Operations, and a command sergeant major brought it to my attention. She said, look, you know, this place, people are driving an hour each way to get their kids, and can you help with that?
Mm-hmm. As a working mother, is child care personal?
It's absolutely personal. I mean, I have personally had that experience of racing to drop my kids off at the daycare center and get into work on time, or racing to get out to pick them up and sort of being the last parent to pick them up and getting the stink eye from the workers.
Do you see this among your own staff?
I do. A good percentage of folks in my immediate office, which is about 30 people, have kids under 5, either, you know, here in the daycare center or in, you know, other daycare centers in the surrounding area.
Was it impactful to hear from soldiers like Chelsea, who had to quit the service, and military moms like Molly, whose child was on the waiting list, 17 waiting lists?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I never want to lose a great soldier and family because they can't get childcare or because they're not happy with their housing. So those, you know, hearing directly from soldiers is always very useful for me.
Was the CBS News investigation impactful?
I think the story did a great job of really, you know, letting people know how it's directly impacting Army families. So yes, I think it's very helpful.
How did you work with the Air Force Secretary to get this done?
Well, really, I think what we were able to do was just lift the problem up to a little bit higher level and kind of get it out of some of the bureaucratic back and forth. I think it helped that Frank Kendall and I have worked together for many years and have a lot of trust, but I think both the Army and the Air Force wanted to find a solution.
You deal with dozens of national security decisions every day. Why did child care rise to the top?
Well, I think, you know, we ask an extraordinary amount from our soldiers and their families, and the last thing they need is another thing to be worrying about. You know, worrying about when are they going to get off the wait list? Why are they spending 2 hours a day commuting back and forth to drop their children off? They just don't need to have that additional burden, and I think that's why it matters, because we want to be able to recruit the best. We want to keep families in the Army, and if we're taking worries off their plate, that helps.
We heard from soldiers that the child care shortage was really impacting the mission. Was that concerning to you?
Absolutely. You know, again, we don't want a situation where someone is distracted from, you know, the main thing, which is doing their job, because they're worried about their kids. Or we don't want to lose a good soldier because, you know, someone who decides not to re-enlist because they weren't able to make the child care work. We've got about 40,000 soldiers who are single parents, and for them, the child care really can be a make or break situation.
And how does that break down in terms of single fathers and single mothers?
Well, somewhat surprisingly, actually 30,000 of those 40,000 are dads, are single dads. And again, you know, that's, if you don't have child care and you're a single parent, it's a big problem.
The country is looking for child care solutions. What's your approach?
Well, part of what we're doing is trying to make sure we're recruiting the best staff. We have actually great facilities and everyone is fully certified, but we're in a war for talent, frankly. So we're trying to raise our pay, have retention bonuses for our staff in CDCs. We're trying to help them with training.
You've worked in the national security space for more than 2 decades. We're in a period with the war in Ukraine, with China flexing its muscle in the Pacific. Have you ever seen a more challenging threat environment?
No, this is certainly the most challenging threat environment in my professional career, and I've seen a lot. I was working in the Pentagon in 9/11, saw the end of the Cold War. It's a very dangerous time.
And with this threat environment, is that why it's also important to resolve something as basic as childcare?
Yes. Again, I think we've got to, we say in the Army, people first, and that means giving people good childcare, good housing, good professional development. And if we want to get the best and keep the best, we have to be able to do that.
The UK has begun producing coins bearing the image of King Charles III. Like his grandfather, King George VI, Charles is not shown wearing a crown. The new monarch is featured on the 50-pence coin, which is the equivalent of 70 U.S. cents. The coin will enter circulation before the end of the year. We're going to take a quick break. Tom Brady and Giselle divorce after more than a decade of marriage. More on that when we return. You're streaming CBS News.
You broke my wheel, I brought us real. If you raise it, whoop, ball of fire.
Legendary rock and roller Jerry Lee Lewis has died. The Great Balls of Fire singer is considered one of the most influential artists of the 1950s. He also helped to popularize the piano as a rock and roll instrument. News of Lewis's death came 2 days after TMZ erroneously reported he had already died. Jerry Lee Lewis was 87 years old. Legendary NFL quarterback Tom Brady and supermodel Giselle have finalized their divorce. The two made the surprise announcement Friday after several weeks of speculation about their marriage. Brady and Giselle had been married for 13 years. They share a daughter and a son together. On Instagram, Giselle wrote, quote, "The decision to end a marriage is never easy, but we have grown apart. I feel blessed for the time we had together and only wish the best for Tom always." A high school student in Indiana is taking action to remember and rectify a violent historical event that often isn't easily talked about. Steve Hartman shares her powerful message in this week's On the Road.
I've never seen anything quite like it. Girl steps to a podium.
Hi, everyone.
Says her name.
I'm Sophie Kloppenberg.
And without uttering another word, gets an ovation. A standing ovation. So what did 17-year-old Sophie Kloppenberg do to deserve such respect here in Posey County, Indiana? She rectified an injustice, 144 years in the making.
In 1878, after a rape allegation, 7 black men were lynched here. 4 of them hung directly outside the same county courthouse they never got to set foot in. It was the largest lynching in state history, and yet the whole incident had been largely forgotten.
Until Sophie heard about it. She started at the courthouse, looking for a plaque or any mention whatsoever.
Nothing on that courthouse square and no public acknowledgement of what happened.
Maybe people didn't want to remember.
I'm sure people don't want to remember because it's hard to remember tough things, but it's unacceptable to just forget.
It's also unrealistic to expect others to care as much about the issue as she did. Posey County is more than 95% white. Erecting a reminder to a racist past wasn't exactly a high priority around here.
Thank you all very much.
But that didn't stop Sophie from appealing to the county commissioners. Repeatedly.
How passionate was she?
Very.
Commission President Bill Collins.
You would probably be hard-pressed to find many seniors in high school anywhere in the country that would be willing to take on something like this.
Racism still exists.
And Bill says even fewer who could succeed.
I'm proud of Posey County, Indiana, and the beautiful people here. We're having the difficult conversations and giving a tangible voice to its minorities. Thank you.
Thanks to that diplomatic touch, this week, here in the heart of Red America, 144 years after that mob gathered in the square, another crowd formed on the very same spot. This time to watch Sophie unveil a memorial bench and historical marker, formally acknowledging the past and celebrating the progress. Steve Hartman, On the Road, in Mount Vernon, Indiana.
Bono, artist, activist, and the lead singer of the Irish rock band U2, is talking about his decades-long fight for social justice, as well as the role faith plays in his music. You'll see all of that on CBS Sunday Morning this weekend. Here's a preview.
In those early days of the band, did any of you have an idea of superstardom?
That would be me. But it doesn't. It's so embarrassing, really. trying to break it down sometimes. When I look at the absurdity of my life, I kind of, what is it? We own some kind of feeling. We own our own tone.
Sure.
So there's something there.
You can watch the full interview on CBS Sunday Morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband successfully underwent surgery after being attacked by a man with a hammer at the couple's California home. What we're learning about the suspect and the charges he's facing. Plus, Elon Musk officially acquires Twitter in a multi-billion-dollar deal. He's already making changes to the company's leadership. And new details about China's efforts to interfere in the U.S. elections using social media. What you should know ahead of November 8th. You're streaming CBS News.